Oh, God, all we can do is laugh. We are now being joined by Kyle Bonagura of ESPN. Let me bring up your tweets last night, Bonnie, to start out with, because that was the one that I think a lot of people are focusing in on. At this point, it has 276,000 views, 432 retweets. Pulisic is left injured in 3 of the 7 World Cup games he started. And I mean, that like encompasses everything about that game that went wrong. And so let's just start there by talking about Christian Pulisic for now I would argue the entirety of his career failing to ever have that moment for the US.
Yeah, it's really a story of failed expectations at this point for Christian Pulisic. I think a little background context is helpful here, Ted. I was very much a part of the bandwagon with Christian Pulisic at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I followed his rise through the Dortmund academy and, was watching the youth national teams that he was a part of in his youth, was kind of a junkie in that way. Was watching live on, Fox Soccer, which was a subscription streamer. Like I think it was 2016 or somewhere around then when he scored his first goal for Dortmund. Really have followed his career very closely. And when he was showing up as a teenager for the national team, he was, for me, the best player immediately when he got on the team. And I thought it was completely justified to allow for the possibility that he would become the best American player ever. And in fact, for a long time, I thought it was just not going to be up for debate, that it would be a slam dunk, reality. But you need to show up when it matters, and he hasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that's his fault, part of it's not. I mean, the injury thing, how much of it is just bad luck? How much of it is, lack of toughness? No one really knows, and I think it's kind of unfair to really speculate too much on that. But I think what is fair is to say that, you know, availability matters, and he just hasn't been there when they needed him, and when he has been there in the World Cup, for sure, he hasn't played at the level that you expect for the face of the program, the face of the team, your supposed best player. So it's turned into a really disappointing career for Pulisic with the national team. Still has done a lot of incredible things and accomplished a lot of significant things for relative to other players in American history. But like when you measure where he's at now versus what everyone thought he could be or should be,
Mm-hmm.
it just isn't there. He's 27 now. He'll be in his 30s by the next World Cup, and at that point, it's your prime. You're at the end of your prime, and to not accomplish anything of note at a World Cup, you had the chance to do it on domestic in a domestic tournament. It's just really disappointing.
It is very disappointing. And I think back to Clint Dempsey and Landon Donovan, two of the faces that we would say are part of those guys that stepped up in big moments for the United States over the course of their careers. And you were waiting for him to have that moment. I mean, Landon Donovan to me is still the guy who's held in the highest regard because of the goals he scored, because of the way he represented his nation. That's not to take anything away from Clint Dempsey, because obviously he's just a beast of a player. But Landon still holds on to that title. But that underlines the point of, like, we're a quarter century on roughly from advancing in 2002, getting to the quarterfinals with Bruce Arena, with Landon Donovan. Like, that's how is it the same failings over and over and over again? And I know that we can talk about pay for play, but I'm like, there's other sports that are pay for play, and we still seem to be able to develop really good athletes. And I know that soccer is global, the competition is global, but still, I feel like our outcomes should be better.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems with pay for play. We could probably sit down for hours and discuss
Yeah.
that. But so I don't think that there's not a great solution for that is the problem, right? In
Mm-hmm.
in a place like England, when you have however many hundred professional clubs in a small area, they all
Yeah.
fund their academies. Here we have, however many MLS teams there are now, 30, 32, and they have academies, but it's the country's too big, and so like who's gonna fund the development? Like it raises like, how is that possible? But but besides the point, the bottom line is the U.S. hasn't, as a national team, has not made progress in terms of just progressing in the tournament. Look, I genuinely believe that this group of players is the most talented group of players that the United States has ever had. And if you had lined them up versus the 2002 team that reached the quarterfinals, look, I think this team would probably beat them. Is a better
Mhm.
team, has, man for man is just that.
I
But at the
agree.
same time, that doesn't matter. You're measured by how far you go and how you look in those moments. And look, let's just go over the last three World Cup trips, right? This one, finishing with the embarrassing loss to Belgium. The one before, round of 16, and you were outclassed by the Netherlands.
Yeah.
Very similar result. Like they didn't look good in either, and so to kind of split hairs between those two performances probably isn't a worthwhile exercise. But like the takeaway is like there's no progress there. And then, before that, it was the Belgium loss in 2014, where again, round of 16, overmatched against a European opponent. So like you keep running into, you keep getting to the same spot and not
Yeah.
being able to progress. Like they didn't play well in any of those three matches. And so for all the raising of the floor, the talent level being better, like playing a more attractive style of soccer at
Mhm.
times, like all that is like it's not nothing, but if it doesn't actually lead to results, it doesn't really matter for the casual fan. And me and you, we like, we're in it year round and are watching, games that don't matter, friendlies and all of that. And like you can kind of appreciate the progress that you've made and
Yeah.
as a program and understanding that there are better players and the team is like has the potential to do special things if we're able to put it all together. But look, if you don't do it in the World Cup, if you don't have a showing in the round of 16, none of that's gonna resonate to our national audience.
I think what is most distressing to me now with the power of hindsight, which is always 2020, if not greater, but when I look at what Pochettino has done in his time, I'm like, 7 good games? I'm like, the first two, Australia, Paraguay, I was okay with the way they played against Bosnia because of what they did after they went down a man, but before that, I didn't think they were great. I liked what I saw against Paraguay and Germany, or excuse me, Senegal and Germany in those two warm-ups. And then, like, there's like one other and the Diego Luna broken nose game. Other than that, like when you combine that with all the different formations and all the different lineups and all the different tactics, and now this embarrassing loss. I mean, that's the thing is like they went out, but Tim Howard stood on his head in 2014 and kept the U.S. in that. And against the Netherlands, yes, they were outclassed, but there was the grit and determination that we associate with the United States men's national team. There was none of that last night. There was just a whimper. They were just soundly defeated and they had no fight and no pushback. And that's why I'm like, how do you bring back the architect of an mostly unimpressive era in which they advanced with an expanded field? Like I don't have an argument for it right now. And that I would love to have this be a freezing cold take. I just don't think you can bring back Poach.
Yeah, so it's tough, right? Because there is, game to game variance that accounts. Like it's soccer's so hard, right? Like if you had it over 15 matches, they wouldn't look that bad 15 times, but they did, and so you have to evaluate based on the actual performance that happened. Like I do, and we talked about this before. I do agree with how they've set up for the most part. I agreed with the formations of the style that they attempted to play with to start the tournament. It looked like it made a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to a team that has better players than you. It didn't work the same way. And I think because they were so dynamic against Paraguay in the first half of the tournament, and that was your first chance to reflect on what this team looks like and kind of set expectations for the rest of the way. It really created a false sense of hope that this team was going to be able to play that way the rest of the tournament, and they really didn't. I mean, they didn't
No,
play that way in the second half against Paraguay. They
which
they
was
were
without
okay,
Pulisic.
right? Without Pulisic, they were fine against Australia, but
Without Pulisic.
it wasn't the same dynamic attacking style that we saw against Paraguay. Turkey was a fully rotated team, so you can't
Yeah, I
even
don't take it.
evaluate
Yeah,
that. And then Bosnia, like they were fine.
you're fine.
Bosnia is not a great team, but they got the job done, and
Yeah.
that matters. But it also wasn't. It didn't look like the same flowing, style that we saw against Paraguay. So you had this incredible first half against a good team. Paraguay is a
Yeah.
really good defensive team, and I think like that praise should still stand. They looked great, and then Paraguay looked even better the rest of the tournament. So in a way, that becomes even more impressive with hindsight. That's
Yeah.
really the only thing that looks more impressive in hindsight. But yeah, after that, there really wasn't long stretches where you could be just really enthusiastic about the way they played. Um, so whether he comes back or not, I always looked at Poach as a short term guy. Like
Mhm.
here's someone who has done well in knockout style competitions. Maybe there's something there about setting up a team for this format of a competition. But look, it just didn't happen. And I think if you play Belgium 10 times, maybe you win once based on what we saw last night. Like the disappointing part on top of that is, I for generations before it was this team that got by, did more with less, more than the sum
Mhm.
of its parts, whatever cliche you want to roll with. But like you said, grit and determination were very much a part of the DNA of this program, and that was not on display last night.
Yeah.
If anything, it was the opposite. It was a team that wilted in the biggest moment. It felt like they knew that Belgium was better than them, and they, after kind of getting run off the field over the first 8 minutes, it was just, well, we're not good enough, and they didn't, and they just accepted that.
Yeah.
Heavy touches, slow to react. I mean, no fight. I mean, it was just all the good. We didn't see any of the good hallmarks of the USMNT from years past, and we didn't see any of the new
Yeah.
talent that we had kind of expected from this group on display either. Aside from Tillman, we saw a couple moments from Balogun. There's a couple moments from McKennie. I think Alex Freeman was incredible in this tournament.
Mhm.
Really one for the future, but really everyone else was really disappointing. Serginho Dest was completely
Yeah.
lost, completely justified to take him off at halftime. I thought Tyler Adams was bullied off the ball quite a bit, and as solid as he is as a defensive midfielder, he didn't look like he was up to the level last night at
Yeah.
all. I actually thought Rainey was okay when he came on, and so maybe there's something to work with there. But Pulisic to be out again is just that was representative of what this whole tournament was for him.
No, it was staggering. And like this leads me all to the thought of like this was building as a golden generation for quite some time. And what's weird is like I talk to the people who aren't in it like us, and they're like, I thought the U.S. wasn't supposed to go this far. But then you talk to the people who are in it, and it's like if you don't make it to the quarterfinals, it's a failure. So this is where I start to wonder like, am I too deep in the weeds to perceive this for what it is? Because like all my friends who are casual observers are like, oh, I thought we were overachieving. Whereas I'm like, no, guys, they had De Bruyne not feature in this game. If he was on our team, he would be our star player by a mile. And I'm like, the polarizing opinions and perceptions, like this is where I just wonder, like, I'm like, I can't see the forest. All these trees are in the way.
Yeah, this was always going to be the game that mattered the most for people who are really into it, because if you're going to measure progress, the round of 16 is the place you couldn't get by. And if you weren't going to get by here, at least make it a competitive game. I mean, Mexico goes out swinging against England
England, yeah.
um, in a way that I think even though they lost that game, their supporters probably felt pretty proud of the
Yeah.
performance, and they showed determination. And that you could talk about the tactics, maybe they weren't set up the best at the end of the game, but at the same time, like, it wasn't about effort and
Yeah.
will and those things. With the US, like, that's the part that's the most frustrating, is it's almost like they gave up.
That
And
game could have been 9-1, by the way.
yes.
There were so many chances. Like early on, before they scored their first goal, I was like, well, we could already be down 2-0, and then suddenly it was 1-0, and then suddenly it was 2-0. It was like, oh my god, what is going on? And even by that point, I think it could have been 5. And then you just kept on counting the great chances that they developed over and over and over. And like you said, it was like there wasn't that fight back. There wasn't that effort. And I think that's we've never gotten embarrassed like that before. That's, I think, the hardest part to take about this is that you're in Seattle, which is, one of the soccer capitals of this country. You've got, in my opinion, one of the best stadiums in the world to play in. I don't know if you've been to matches there. That people used to talk about. You've been there for football, I believe, but for the argument of pipe didn't sound. I'm always like, yeah, maybe they do, but that stadium's loud as hell. Like it reverberates through there. It's noisy. I've been there with 40,000, I think, and it's still loud. But this was just it failed to capture the moment so profoundly that you feel like you have to rethink everything. And I don't know where they go from here. I don't know what the next step is.
The problem with international soccer is the player pool is the player pool. It's not like you can go out and sign free agents and rework your roster. I mean,
Well, Jurgen was the one who started this.
right. I mean, they're like for sure. Like you can go recruit dual nats and do all that, and like there's like sums you can do on the margins. I mean, look, Balogun and Malik Tillman were probably the two best players in the tournament for the U.S.
And Richards, I think.
Richards was good. Alex Freeman was good.
Yeah.
Those guys were on the conversation, right? So like two of those guys you put in the work to recruit to be part of the program, wasn't, that was before Poach arrived, but like US Soccer, Berhalter deserves credit for the way he pursued those guys for sure. But yeah, like the thing is like next week the best players are not like they'll still be the best players. I mean, I think we saw against Turkey, that second group of players also wasn't as good as the starters.
No.
I mean, there was a clear drop off almost man for man across the board in a way that was like, well, like who there wasn't really an obvious tone changer like to bring off the bench. So it's like if you don't have other options who are nearly on the same level as the starters, like what can you do? I mean, for me, Serginho Dest, I like the idea of him playing higher up because he's just so creative with the ball, but he's just not a winger.
Yeah.
He's not a winger. He can't make those. He's good in tight spaces, can like kind of play around with the ball, 1-2s, those sort of things. But if you need him to like make like a lung busting run with the ball over 30 yards, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think you needed that was a problem. I think the Belgium was able to just push up their right, our left, and force Pulisic to drop more defensively. Completely got him, out of the game, and then Pulisic was no confidence on the ball. But like going back to like what's next, there's not great solutions to turn it over in international soccer. That's just the way it works. And so it goes back to, okay, this is generational, and this is the team for however long it's the team. There'll be slowly it'll change over based on age and all of those things. Hopefully a few guys develop. I keep mentioning Freeman, but he's like the kind of the obvious example of like what has to happen. Guys have to emerge from places that are unexpected, and work their way in. Without that, there's really only so much you can do.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the thing is I just the argument was always that for so many of these guys it was building up to this moment, whereas we haven't had as much chatter about the youths that are coming up right now. Maybe that's because we have been so focused on these guys being here right now. Whereas I've always felt since 2014, it's like the guys in the pipeline, they're coming, but that chatter hasn't been there. I mean, right? Isn't that it feels that way to me at least.
Yeah, I
think
mean, that's
Sullivan would be the one.
Right, Sullivan. There's a couple others. What I think is, yeah, like there was just way more like you were always looking for who's going to fill the hole over the last 8 years, right? After they missed the World Cup in 2018, it's like, okay, you knew you had to completely flush it, and you were going to have 5 years before another World Cup, theoretically, and so you had some time to develop and see different pieces. But once you had Christian Pulisic in his early 20s, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams, Gio Reyna, even Dest, Anthony Robinson, you had guys who you look at like, hey, like these guys are starters in their early 20s.
Yeah.
In theory, they should be in the mix for the next decade. And so there wasn't it didn't feel like there was this pressing need to find a guy who's going to be the guy, because you had a pretty good option, theoretically at that time. Now you just need more competition. You have to have other guys to come in and push those guys. I think what's clear is like, look, Pulisic still can be a very good player. He might end up with the American goal record. He still is going to go down as one of the all-time greats, but you can't just look to him and be like, well, we have Pulisic for a couple of reasons. One, he was ineffective during the tournament outside the first half against Paraguay, and just his unreliability. So
yeah, he's a super sub to me.
Yeah, that's if you look at when he was at Chelsea, like he had some really impressive moments, but like Tuchel used him as a sub. He became a sub because that's the way a world-class manager felt like he was most effective. I mean, he's the one who gave Pulisic his debut at Dortmund, knew him as well as any coach in the world, and felt like that was the best way to use him. Even when he was having that incredible run through the Champions League with Chelsea against Real Madrid, he was one of the best players on the field in the semifinal of that tournament, and still didn't earn a start based on that those performances because it's those quicks. It's he's a change of pace guy at the highest levels. He's not a guy you build your attack around, and
Yeah.
that's just the sad reality of talking about that level and what he is. And at 27 years old, he's not going to get better now. If anything, he'll regress. And to be honest, I would not be surprised if this experience of the World Cup and the disappointment has an impact on him, and the disappointment is tough for him to bounce back to if cobbling that together with the injuries and just disappointment, like what's next. Like he had this, I tweeted about it, like he had this commercial running for weeks about creating a legacy about
Yeah.
this guy changed American soccer. And if that's you're putting that out there for millions of people over a month, and to show up the way he did, it becomes kind of a joke.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I'm wondering about now is whether or not the United States men's national team and their performance is going to deter from what is hopefully the overall positive effect that this tournament is having around the United States, because I still feel like people are learning to love the game, and I hope that they will attend MLS matches, USL matches, and I hope that they've gotten beyond the whole soccer is boring argument, which I understand in the 90s when people were maybe getting more into it, that there was more of a defensive mindset, and the game has changed. It's much more attacking now. It's very, very different than it was, generations ago. And I think that the outcome is going to be positive. But I guess how do they continue to capitalize upon that? Because the part of this is that you hope is that it lends itself to more kids saying, I want to do that. And I've seen those takes saying, like, if this team had been playing, if I had had this access to this sport when I was, 8, 10, 12 years old, I would have wanted to be on the United States men's national team. Instead, I wanted to be, Houston Rocket or a New York Yankee.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple conversations about this World Cup, and that's an important part of it. Is like, what does this World Cup do for soccer in the country? I still think it's overwhelmingly positive and a massive success. And there were still enough good moments from the national team. Look, they won 3 games, and that's exciting. Like how many? I'd have to go back and like double check how many World Cup games they've won over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
But to have 3 days where you woke up and you're like, all right, the national team is playing. You watch it, they win. It doesn't matter if it's a diluted pool, right? Those were exciting days and really
I
fun to
actually,
be
I
part
don't
of.
think it was that diluted, by the way. I mean, the parody on display, I
Sure.
think, was
Yeah,
pretty
that
impressive.
absolutely. No, I 100% agree with that. And like, look, I went to the game at Levi's with my son. He's 6. Incredible bucket list like day,
Yeah.
right? Saw a lot of younger people there. The crowd skewed a little bit younger, I think, more than like a 49er playoff game or a Warrior playoff game.
Yeah.
And so I think there's like a clear shift where like this younger generation is like there are more soccer fans. That
Yeah.
is like obviously a fact. And I think the hype wasn't just about the US team. It was about the World Cup as a whole and soccer as a sport.
Mhm.
I mean, we saw Levi's in Santa Clara had one of the worst runouts of games in terms of just like who was
Yeah.
like
The
what team
who's who.
playing there. But those games were all sold out, and
Yeah.
I didn't go to any of them. But like the people I talked to who did go said the atmosphere was incredible
Yeah.
for games that shouldn't have really generated a great environment. But like that's all positive, and there's still a few more weeks of this tournament, a couple more weeks of this tournament. There's going to be some cool moments,
Yeah.
right? The World Cup is the World Cup, and it's so special because of how how infrequent it is every 4 years, and there's just so few opportunities. That's what makes all these games so incredible to watch. So if you take away the U.S.'s disaster, in the round of 16, like everything else about this World Cup has been incredible. I
Yeah.
think it's been great for the sport, for the most part, for how people perceive the United States, just the people of the United States, certainly, right?
Yeah.
And I think you'll see a jump in enthusiasm about the sport it always happens. People get turned on to the World Cup. Um, Regardless of where it's being played or when it's being played. And the fact that this was in the United States, it drew big television numbers.
Yeah.
People understand that soccer can be exciting, and it is exciting. And I think the place that has the like really matters next is like, look, MLS has got to take the next step. You
Yeah.
know, it's gotta continue to grow. It's gotta open up the purse strings a little bit.
Mhm.
Bring in more high profile players that are not in the retirement phase of their career.
Yeah.
They need to, it's not it. There's conflicting factors here, right? So it's better for U.S. national team players and the U.S. national team to play abroad and to play in the better leagues, but MLS is very much incentivized for its own growth and development to try to lure some of those guys back. And
Yeah.
so what's better for MLS is not necessarily what's best for the national team, but all of those things kind of work together in raising the profile of the sport in the United States. And so, it will be incremental. We saw what the World Cup did after 94 and just of kind of introducing the sport to the country. Well, it's been introduced for a long time now. MLS is one of the most represented leagues in the World Cup, and
Yeah.
that just is incredible progress. But, over the next 15, 20 years, you have to keep taking steps. And then, more people will just appreciate the sport for what it is. And look, I think that we're able to discuss how disappointing the U.S. was from a purely soccer standpoint and have people be interested in having that
Yeah.
same discussion. It's not ideal that they lost, but it does in a kind of backwards way show the progress that this sport and this team has made.
I wanted to back up about you being at the game at Levi's against Bosnia Herzegovina, and the pictures that really struck me were the full bowl, and it's like the Super Bowl doesn't feel like that. Like there are empty seats at the Super Bowl, there are people out of their seats at the Super Bowl. That shot of Levi's, the multiple shots of the wide shots, the on top shots, drone shots, it's packed to a level that I've never seen. And that's not just Levi's, that's these other stadiums. They are packed with people in a way that the Super Bowl does not represent. I think that's, if you want to point to what culture shifting is indicative of, it's that. Just because that type of a densely packed stadium with everybody in their seats doesn't happen at the NFL, which is what we would consider the king of American sports.
Yeah, so I think it's closer to like the Super Bowl is so different because it's a neutral venue. It's a lot of corporate tickets. You get some fans, but it's certainly not partisan to a team. For me, this was closer to like if the 49ers played in an NFC title game at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is when you go to a 49er game, you kind of especially in the playoffs, you expect you'll have another chance to go to a 49er playoff game the next year and the next year and the next
Yeah.
year in theory, right? You kind of just know that as long as we're around, that like the 49ers have a chance to host playoff games. And so there'll be other chances. The difference with the World Cup is when I took my son to Levi's to watch the US national team play in a knockout round in our backyard of like knockout of the World Cup in our backyard, like that opportunity might never happen again. And
Or
so
30
it's such a
years from now.
unique experience, right? To be able to experience that. And so there was a special buzz, I think, because of this was a bucket list event for a lot of people that made it really special. And it's just like it's comparable to a playoff NFL game just because people are into it and look, you care about it the maximum amount you can if if
Yeah.
Super Bowl's on the line or something like that. So you have people that are really into it, but soccer's different in that like you're kind of waiting for one singular big moment as opposed to cheering throughout the game. So like that feeling is different and unique. And I know my son is 6 and he had I'm sure he'll remember that remember it forever, at least tell people that he was there forever.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that's the thing is like it's a memory maker, unlike everything else, which is again what I hope is the outcome from people is that they do have these positive memories that they associated, that more kids want to play, that they want to take part in it. But I do, like as I said, I wanted to back up, then I do want to go forward again. The MLS switching to the Euro calendar or the globe calendar. I mean, that's like South America and Central America be like, what are you talking about? But switching to the Euro calendar, as I like to call it, and it's been bandied as this aligns us as a way to more effectually spend on players. Do you buy that argument? Is this the right move going forward to be aligned with the EPL and La Liga, etc., and not have your playoffs against the NFL and college football in the late fall, early winter.
Yeah, so I agree with that. It makes a lot of sense from player acquisition, selling players, because like in the past, you've had MLS like the big the better teams in Europe. They don't want to really use the January transfer window. They want to have their team going into the start of the season. So
Yeah,
like occasionally they'll be like you can bring a guy in mid-year and that
yeah,
happens, but it's not the preferred way to operate. And so in MLS when MLS teams don't want if you have your best player, you don't want to sell him in the middle of the season as
yeah,
you're chasing you're chasing a playoff run or whatever
yeah.
supporter shield whatever your ambitions might be. There was no incentive for an MLS team to sell your best player in the middle of the year, especially when you can't turn around and dump
And
it
replace
back
it. Yeah.
into the roster because you're constrained by the salary cap, right? Like if you were to develop a guy, say you're able to sell him for $20 million, right? And then like in other leagues around the world, you could take that 20 million and get five guys at 4 million and maybe raise the floor of your team and make your team overall better. But like MLS doesn't, you can't operate that way because of the salary cap. And so
Mhm.
now you're losing your best player and you can't even use that money to put it back into the team in the same way these other leagues do. And then like because of the timing of it all, when you want to sell your best players, it's after the year. It's like the season ends in October, November, December. The window opens in January. By that point, these players haven't been playing for several weeks in many cases. And so, how interested are teams in Europe to acquire those guys in that window? It lowers their value because you're just going to pay less in the winter window.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's all theoretical. Of course, we'll see how it actually plays out, but I do think it makes a lot of sense for the business side of MLS to align with the European calendar, as you said. You don't have to. I think international breaks and those things are a part of that conversation as well. And
Mhm.
look, I think they're stuck with the salary cap for the foreseeable future, but I think that needs to raise, and you just need to get higher profile players in the league. Like MLS likes to really, maybe not the league as an entity, but certainly people around the league like to talk about, oh, how valuable these franchises are. Well, like if you're $1 billion franchise, you can have a salary. You can give your roster
Yeah.
more than like the SMU football team
Yeah.
makes, right? Like the most valuable roster in Major League Soccer should not be less than the Cal Bears, right?
Yeah. No, it's true.
There is if you want to play with the big boys, you gotta ante up, and so hopefully that happens as well.
Yeah, no, and in terms of not having go head to head with the NFL and college football when the playoffs are on, do you think that helps? Just because people will be not, I mean, it's just culturally we're so attuned to football in the fall. I mean, it's
Yeah, I think
hard.
I think there's some benefits there. It's lighter in the spring, and so maybe there'll be more opportunities to catch some eyeballs. But I think that's less of a factor for me than the other stuff
Mhm.
because I think in MLS, I think what's unique about MLS is I think you have a lot of people who are interested in their own team, but are not necessarily interested in the league as a
Mhm.
as a neutral. So it's like, yeah, like you'll watch your own team when they're in the playoffs, but you're not really so invested in like what other results are happening around the league. But so maybe that changes with the playoffs. Certainly I think that the dynamic of having it in the fall made it very easy to like, hey, wow, maybe I'm not going to watch the Columbus Crew in New York City FC
Yeah,
if it's on a Sunday and the Niners play at 1 and that game's at 10 a.m. Like it just
yeah.
it was never set up for them to bring in a lot of neutrals in that way. But I do think on balance the change is good. But also I reserve the right to change my mind if it doesn't actually play out that way and there's unintended consequences that we're not able to kind of
Yeah.
game out right now.
Yeah, no, we won't know till we get there. And I guess as, one to finish on is the idea of MLS being paywalled on Apple TV. I don't know where that is going, adjustments, the future. Obviously, it's not the 10-year deal that it was. But then again, I'm like, well, I feel like a lot of soccer fans are now used to going and finding things on streaming. Like the EPL is out there, but a lot of more people are using streaming services to watch it. What happens with MLS and Apple and TV and how people watch it? Because listen, every other sport is going that way. I mean, there was the one thing that Don got right is that streaming is the future. However, I mean, it's if it were me, I would not do it until you absolutely had to, just because I think that's the nature of how broadcast works. But that said, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, every all the news every day is about the collapse of regional sports networks.
Yeah, so I think going to streaming made sense. I think the mistake, maybe not mistake, just the miscalculation is it's like now it's on Apple TV. This year there's no paywall
Secondary paywall.
behind the
Yeah,
paywall.
yeah,
That was the problem in the
yeah,
first iteration of the Apple deal is that you needed to have Apple TV, which is a big streamer and a lot of people had it, so I was fine with that. But like the fact that then you then had to have another
yeah.
streaming like layer to it was that made it really hard to get into. But now that that barrier is gone, I think it's fine. That's just the reality of how sports are going to be consumed. Like everything's going to
Yeah.
be on a streamer at some point. Traditional cable will eventually no longer exist. Like everyone's going to that model, and so whether that model is good or bad, like I don't think it necessarily really matters because like that everything's going to go that way, and it just you need to be on one of the main ones. You need to either be on Amazon, you need to be on Netflix, you need to be on Apple, ESPN and Fox have the one that's really sports heavy that is probably going to get a lot of attention as well, as long as those networks continue to have the rights. But that's just the reality of it. So everyone's going to be playing by the same rules, or playing in the same playground, the streaming playground at some point. So I'm of the mind that like might as well embrace it and get good at it and figure out how to best operate in that space.
Is the NFL going to be the last man standing of being on broadcast television, even though now they already put playoff games behind a paywall?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? It's always going to come down to the money, right? So I think the
Yeah.
NFL, like when, like I don't know the details of the what the NFL contract looks like or when those deals are up. So to say whether it's first or not, I don't know.
Yeah,
But I
no.
think like look, if Apple or Amazon comes in with a Godfather offer that makes that dwarfs what CBS or Fox or whoever it might be is willing to pay, then it's certainly possible because money talks, and those tech giants are going to be tough to compete against for the traditional media companies.
Yeah, no, it is. It's going to be interesting. To me, not that I don't think that the product on Apple is any less than it was on the RSNs. And I think in many ways it's improvement, the camera quality and such. It's just anytime you're behind a paywall, you cannot develop organic fans the same way. You're not going to stumble upon the game on a Saturday night and just have somebody who's like, oh, well, this is the team that such and such told me about that is, in my market. It's you have to go to Apple TV and believe me, I
Right.
could go on a longer diatribe about my issues with the modern TV experience for all things. I'll save us all that moment. But KB, I appreciate your time as always. I wish we had more U.S. games to talk about, but I will let you go, man, and I will hopefully see you out at PayPal Park or Levi's or at Stanford Stadium, where they've also got some games coming up soon. Hopefully, it was enough to get your 6-year-old to want to come out to more matches.
He'll be wearing his Quakes jersey, the
There we
the
go.
Grateful Dead kid, loving it.
The Grateful Dead kid is pretty sick, I got to admit. All right, KB, be good.
All right, see you, Ted.